The Zookeeper. A young tourist disappears in the jungle after a terrifying encounter with a giant gorilla. Faced with fear, she is forcibly taken to an isolated cave with no way out. While everyone believes she will be attacked, something completely unexpected happens. What she experiences inside defies everything we know about instinct, danger, and protection. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. Ashley always felt that her life in Chicago had become a predictable sequence of identical days. Work, home, work, home. At 26, she felt like she was living on autopilot, watching the years pass by through the window of the office where she worked as a financial analyst. The routine had become so suffocating that she even dreamed of spreadsheets and reports. It was during lunch with her college friends, Jessica and Olivia, that the idea emerged. They were complaining about the sameness of their previous vacations. Always the same crowded beaches, the same resorts with artificial pools and scheduled entertainment. Jessica, always the most adventurous of the group, suggested something completely different. An expedition to the Olympic National Park region in Washington, one of the most preserved and remote areas of the United States. Just imagine, Jessica said with sparkling eyes, days without internet, without traffic noise, just us and the wildest nature you can imagine. I have a contact who organizes this kind of expedition. It's for people who want a real experience, not those superficial tourist trips. Ashley felt something stir inside her chest, a mixture of fear and excitement that she hadn't experienced for a long time. Olivia, always more cautious, raised all possible concerns: safety, comfort, communication. But there was something in the proposal that deeply touched Ashley. Perhaps it was exactly what she needed to break that sensation of merely existing. After weeks of planning and preparation, the three boarded a flight to Seattle. From there, a car trip would take them to the expedition base. Ashley looked out the airplane window, observing how the urban landscape gradually gave way to infinite green expanses. She felt as if she was literally leaving her old life behind, even if temporarily. The guide who received them at the airport was a middle-aged man named Michael, with sun-tanned skin and calloused hands that told stories of years in the wilderness. His eyes had that intensity of someone who knows nature, both in its beauty and its dangers. During the car ride, he wouldn't stop talking about precautions, safety rules, and the importance of never straying from the group. The wilderness doesn't forgive carelessness, Michael said seriously. Especially at night. You might think you know nature because you've watched documentaries or visited zoos, but here it's different. Here nature is sovereign, and we are just visitors who need to respect the rules to return home. The road was an adventure in itself. Hours of jolts, potholes, and sharp curves. Ashley felt every muscle in her body reacting to the irregular movement of the jeep. But at the same time, she observed, fascinated, how the vegetation was becoming denser, wilder. The trees seemed to grow in size and mystery with each mile traveled. It was during a stop to refuel that Ashley had her first premonition that this trip would be different from anything she had ever experienced. While Michael checked the fuel and Jessica and Olivia took the opportunity to stretch their legs, she moved a few yards away to admire the landscape. The green immensity extended as far as her eyes could see, punctuated by sounds she had never heard before. Cries of unknown birds, cracking branches, whispers of leaves moved by the wind. It was then that she noticed something that made her heart race. Among the tallest trees, a shadow moved with a fluidity that didn't seem natural. It was too big to be a bird, and it moved too coordinately to be just the wind shaking the branches. Ashley stood still, trying to focus her vision on that specific area of the forest, but the shadow had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Ashley, let's go!" shouted Olivia. "Michael said we have to continue our journey before it gets dark." She ran back to the jeep, but couldn't get that image out of her mind. During the rest of the trip, she became more attentive to movements in the forest, but saw nothing else out of the ordinary. She tried to convince herself that it had just been her imagination, perhaps a combination of branches and shadows that created an optical illusion. When they finally reached the base camp, the sun was already beginning to set, tinting the sky with orange hues that reflected on the treetops. The place was more rustic than Ashley had imagined. Some tents, a common area covered with a thatched roof, basic bathrooms, and an improvised kitchen. But there was something magical about that place, a feeling of being truly connected with something bigger and older than anything she knew. Michael gathered the small group. Besides the 3 friends, there were 2 more tourists, a retired couple from Minnesota, to explain the schedule for the coming days. They would take daytime hikes on previously mapped trails, always accompanied by him or another local guide. The nights would be for rest, reflection, and stargazing, which shone there with an intensity impossible to see in cities. "Remember," Michael said for the 10th time, "never stray from the group. The forest can be confusing even for those who know it. It's easy to get lost, and finding someone lost here can take days. Besides, there are animals that prefer to avoid humans, but can become dangerous if they feel cornered or threatened." On that first night, Ashley could hardly sleep. It wasn't just the constant noise of the forest, crickets, owls, sounds she couldn't identify, but a strange feeling of being watched. Several times she left the tent to look around, but saw only darkness punctuated by the faint glow of some stars between the treetops. The next morning, they woke to the sound of birds singing in complex choruses that seemed like a natural symphony. Breakfast was simple but comforting. Local fruits, bread, strong coffee, and condensed milk. Michael seemed more relaxed in the daylight, telling stories about the region, the animal species they might spot, and local legends about forest spirits. The first hike was revealing. Ashley discovered that walking in the forest required a completely different kind of attention from any other physical activity she had ever practiced. Each step needed to be calculated, each low branch observed, each sound analyzed. It was as if all her senses had been amplified. During the hike, Michael pointed out details that would go unnoticed by inexperienced eyes: animal footprints in the mud, medicinal plants used by local communities, signs that certain animals had recently passed through. Ashley felt like a child discovering a completely new world, where each leaf, each sound, each smell had a specific meaning. It was at the end of the morning, when they stopped for a snack near a small river, that Ashley had her second disturbing experience. She had moved just a few yards away from the group to wash her face in the fresh water, when she heard a sound that made her freeze, a low, deep grunt, different from anything she had ever heard. It came from somewhere in the forest, not too far away, but impossible to locate precisely. Michael immediately noticed her frightened expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, already positioning himself between her and the direction from which the sound had come. "I heard something," Ashley whispered. "A grunt, as if it was a large animal." Michael was silent for a few seconds, listening attentively. Then he relaxed a bit. "Probably a tapir or a wild boar. They make impressive noises, but they usually run away when they sense our presence. Still, let's get back to the group." But Ashley knew that sound had been different. There was something in it that touched a primitive part of her brain, activating survival instincts she didn't know she possessed. For the rest of the hike, she stayed closer to the group, but couldn't stop looking at the surrounding forest, searching for any suspicious movement. The afternoon brought a different activity: bird watching in a clearing where various species gathered to drink water. Ashley tried to concentrate on the vibrant colors of the toucans and macaws, the grace of the hummingbirds, the melodious sounds that filled the air. But her mind kept going back to that shadow she had seen the day before, and to the grunt she had heard that morning. Olivia noticed her distraction. "Are you okay? You seem worried about something." Ashley hesitated. How could she explain a sensation that she herself didn't completely understand? "It's just that I feel like we're being watched. I know it might sound paranoid, but there's something in the forest that I can't identify." Jessica laughed. "It's the big city effect. We are so used to controlled environments that when we encounter real nature, our mind creates ghosts. It's normal." But Michael, who had overheard the conversation, didn't laugh. He observed Ashley attentively and then looked around the clearing with the experienced eyes of someone who knew every sign of the forest. "Sometimes," he said calmly, "our instincts pick up things that our rational mind hasn't processed yet. Don't completely ignore these sensations, but also don't let fear ruin the experience." Those words kept echoing in Ashley's mind for the rest of the day. When they returned to the camp at the end of the afternoon, she felt a confused mixture of fascination and apprehension. That first experience in the forest had awakened something inside her that she didn't know existed: a primitive connection with nature, but also a keen awareness that there she was, no longer the predator at the top of the food chain, but just another vulnerable creature in an environment that followed very different rules from those she knew. The second night at the camp was even more restless than the first. Ashley woke up several times with the sensation that something was moving around the tents. The third time she woke up, she decided to check if her friends were also awake, but found Jessica and Olivia sleeping deeply, apparently undisturbed by the same premonitions that tormented her. As she quietly exited the tent, Ashley was greeted by a surprisingly clear night. The full moon illuminated the forest with a silvery light that created dancing shadows and gave the tree contours an almost mystical quality. The air was fresh and loaded with the intense aromas of the forest: moist earth, decomposing leaves, nocturnal flowers exhaling sweet and exotic perfumes. It was then that she saw it clearly for the first time. Between two giant trees about 50 yards away, an imposing figure observed the camp. Even at a distance and under the irregular moonlight, there was no doubt about what she was seeing: a gorilla of impressive proportions erect on its hind legs, with a posture that conveyed both power and a strange serenity. Ashley was paralyzed not out of fear, but out of a fascination she couldn't explain. The animal showed no aggression, it just observed, as if it were a silent guardian evaluating the visitors in its territory. Its eyes, even from a distance, seemed to reflect a deep intelligence and a melancholy that touched something in Ashley's heart. The moment lasted perhaps 2 minutes, though it seemed like an eternity. Then, unhurriedly, the gorilla lowered itself onto all fours and disappeared among the trees with a surprising grace for an animal of its size. Ashley stood there for a long time afterward, questioning whether she had really seen what she thought she had seen. The next morning, during breakfast, she decided to tell Michael about her experience. The guide stopped chewing and looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise and concern. "Are you sure of what you saw?" he asked, with the serious tone of someone who knows the forest and its secrets. "I'm absolutely sure," replied Ashley. "It was a gorilla, very large, watching me, but it didn't seem aggressive, just curious." Michael was silent for a few moments, clearly pondering how to respond. Finally, he said, "There are sporadic reports of sightings of a solitary gorilla in this region. Some biologists believe it might be an animal that escaped from a research program decades ago, or perhaps a descendant of animals illegally introduced. There's never been scientific confirmation, but the reports are too consistent to be ignored." Jessica and Olivia listened to the conversation with skepticism. "Ashley, are you sure it wasn't a very vivid dream?" asked Olivia. "I mean, a gorilla in Olympic National Park. That's not geographically possible." But Michael shook his head. "Actually, there are precedents. Animals introduced, whether legally or illegally, sometimes manage to adapt to environments different from their original habitats. And if what some researchers suspect is true, this animal has been here for many years, perhaps decades." The conversation was interrupted when Michael announced they would take a longer hike that day, exploring a deeper area of the forest where there was a spectacular waterfall. Ashley felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Part of her hoped to encounter the gorilla again, while another part feared what might happen if the encounter was under less controlled circumstances. The hike began early, right after breakfast. The group followed a narrower and more rugged trail than on previous hikes. Michael explained that they were heading to a less visited area, where the forest was denser and the sounds of human activity didn't reach. "Here you're going to experience the forest as it really is," he said, "without the subtle modifications that our constant presence causes in animal behavior." As they walked, Ashley noticed that the sounds of the forest gradually changed. The birds sang differently, more wild and varied. The insects created a complex symphony that seemed to echo from all directions, and there were other sounds, harder to identify. Movements in the vegetation, distant calls of animals she couldn't name. It was after about 2 hours of hiking that the group decided to take a break near a stream to rest and hydrate. Michael warned that they should stay close, as that area was known to have larger animals that might feel threatened by human presence. Ashley moved just a few yards away to wash her face in the cool water of the stream when she heard Jessica shout her name urgently. She turned quickly and saw her friends pointing to something behind her. When she turned around, her heart almost stopped. There, less than 30 feet away, was the gorilla she had seen the night before. But now, in daylight and so close, she could see every detail of its impressive appearance. It was even larger than she had imagined, with powerful muscles that moved under dark, thick fur. Its hands were enormous, capable of breaking thick branches like twigs, but it was its eyes that impressed her most. They were intelligent, almost human in their expressiveness, and there was a deep sadness in them that touched Ashley's heart. The animal didn't move, just observed her with an intensity that made Ashley feel as if she was being evaluated in some way. Michael shouted instructions from the other side of the stream. "Don't move, don't make direct eye contact. Slowly, very slowly, start backing away." But Ashley discovered that she couldn't move. It wasn't fear that paralyzed her, but a deep fascination. There was something in the gorilla's presence that awakened a connection she didn't know how to explain. It was as if, for a moment, two completely different species were communicating through something more primitive and fundamental than words. It was then that everything changed quickly. Ashley tried to take a step back, following Michael's instructions, but the ground, soaked by recent rains, was slipperier than it seemed. Her right foot lost traction, and she fell heavily on the wet stones of the stream. A sharp pain shot through her leg when she tried to get up. The gorilla reacted immediately to the sound of the fall. In a few quick and fluid movements, it crossed the space that separated them. Ashley tried to crawl away, but the pain in her leg was too intense. She vaguely remembered something she had read about wild animals, that playing dead might be a survival strategy. She lay still, controlling her breathing and closing her eyes, trying to ignore the pain throbbing in her leg. She felt the gorilla approach. Its smell was strong but not unpleasant, a mixture of earth, vegetation, and something wild that awakened ancestral instincts. She could hear its heavy breathing, feel its hot breath when it leaned in to investigate her more closely. Its enormous hands gently touched her injured leg, and Ashley had to use all her willpower not to scream. But instead of the aggression she expected, she felt something completely unexpected: care. The gorilla's touch, although firm, was surprisingly gentle. It seemed to be examining the wound, trying to understand the extent of the damage. When Ashley couldn't contain a low moan of pain, she expected that to trigger an attack. Instead, the gorilla paused for a moment, as if pondering its next actions. From across the stream, Ashley could hear the desperate cries of her friends, and Michael trying to organize a rescue plan, but their voices seemed to come from very far away, as if she were in a bubble separate from reality, where only she and that extraordinary animal existed. Suddenly, the gorilla lifted her with impressive ease. Ashley prepared for the worst, but instead of being attacked, she found herself being carried like a child in the powerful arms of the animal. It moved with determination through the forest, following trails that only it knew, rapidly moving away from the place where her friends remained. The journey was both terrifying and hypnotic. Ashley observed the landscape passing quickly around her, noticing how the gorilla navigated the forest with absolute familiarity. It avoided obstacles, chose the safest paths, and maintained a constant rhythm that demonstrated impressive endurance. Now and then it stopped to adjust her position in its arms, always careful not to aggravate her injury. The rain began as a light drizzle, but quickly intensified until it became a tropical storm. The heavy drops created a curtain of water that made it difficult to see and transformed the forest floor into a treacherous mud bath. But the gorilla continued to move safely, as if it knew every stone, every root, every branch on the path. Ashley lost track of time. It could have been an hour or several hours when they finally stopped. Through the curtain of rain, she saw that they were in front of an impressive rock formation. A cave opened in the face of the rock, partially hidden by a tangle of roots and vegetation that camouflaged it almost perfectly. The gorilla carried her into the cave and carefully deposited her on the dry stone floor. Immediately, Ashley felt relief at being out of the torrential rain. The cave was larger than it seemed from the outside, with a ceiling high enough for the gorilla to stand comfortably erect. There was evidence that the place was regularly used: dry leaves arranged as a kind of bed, fruit remains, marks on the walls that suggested years of habitation. The gorilla positioned itself near the entrance of the cave, like a silent sentinel. Ashley tried to process what had happened. She had essentially been kidnapped by a wild animal, taken to a remote location where no one would be able to find her easily. She should be terrified, and part of her was. But there was another part, deeper and more instinctive, that felt strangely safe. Observing the gorilla, Ashley began to notice details she had missed in the confusion of the previous events. It had old scars, marks that suggested past injuries, perhaps confrontations with other animals, or more likely, encounters with humans that hadn't ended well. One of its ears had a distinctive mark, as if it had been cut. Its hands, although powerful, showed signs of care. Clean nails, no signs of recent aggression. Even more intriguing was its behavior. It didn't treat her as prey or a threat, but as something that needed to be protected. Now and then, it looked in her direction as if checking on her well-being, but without showing any aggressive intention. The first hours in the cave were the longest in Ashley's life. The pain in her leg had decreased to a constant throbbing, but the uncertainty about her situation created a tension that seemed to fill all the space around her. The gorilla remained in its vigil near the entrance, occasionally looking in her direction, but never approaching close enough to seem threatening. The rain continued to fall heavily outside, creating a sound curtain that muffled all the other noises of the forest. Ashley tried to evaluate her options. Her leg was clearly hurt, but didn't seem to be broken. She could move it, although each movement brought waves of pain. Her backpack had been left behind at the accident site, so she had no access to her cell phone or any provisions. It was then that she began to observe the gorilla more attentively, trying to decipher its behaviors and intentions. There was something in its movements that suggested experience with similar situations. The way it periodically checked the entrance of the cave, as if it were evaluating external threats. The manner in which it organized dry leaves and branches, creating a natural barrier against moisture. Everything indicated that this animal had developed sophisticated survival strategies that went far beyond basic instinct. Gradually, Ashley began to pick up other sounds coming from outside the cave. Among the noise of the rain, she could distinguish distant roars and movements in the vegetation that suggested the presence of other large animals. On one occasion, something approached the entrance of the cave, producing low and threatening grunts. The gorilla immediately positioned itself more defensively, emitting a warning sound that echoed off the stone walls. The intruder quickly moved away. It was at this moment that Ashley had her first great understanding. She wasn't being held prisoner, but protected. The gorilla had taken her to that place because it was genuinely the safest place it knew in the region. All its behaviors, the constant vigilance, the strategic position near the entrance, even the careful way it had carried her, were protective actions. This revelation brought a mixture of relief and confusion. Why would a wild animal do this? What experiences in its past had led it to develop these protective instincts toward a different species? Ashley remembered documentaries she had seen about animals that, after traumatic experiences, developed atypical behaviors, sometimes demonstrating empathy and care for other species. As the hours passed, she began to notice more details about the gorilla that confirmed her suspicions about its past. Beyond the visible scars, there were subtle signs that it had had significant contact with humans before. The way it reacted to her movements, never with complete surprise but with a cautious familiarity. The way it seemed to understand her basic needs, approaching when she showed excessive discomfort, moving away when she seemed apprehensive. The afternoon brought a significant change. The rain had stopped, and Ashley realized she could hear helicopter sounds in the distance. Her friends and Michael had managed to organize a search team. The sound awakened in her an urgency that had been dormant due to the extraordinary circumstances in which she found herself. She needed to find a way to signal her location. Searching the pockets of her clothes, Ashley found her wallet, some coins, and to her surprise, a small whistle she had bought as a safety item before the trip. When she began to blow it, producing sharp sounds that echoed through the cave, the gorilla reacted immediately. But instead of aggression, it demonstrated what seemed to be curiosity and even understanding. The animal approached her for the first time since they had arrived at the cave. Ashley held her breath, not knowing what to expect. But the gorilla simply sat a few yards away and observed her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to be processing the situation. When she stopped blowing the whistle, it emitted a low sound that wasn't a threatening grunt, but something more like a whisper or murmur. Encouraged by this reaction, Ashley decided to try more direct communication. Slowly, she extended one of her hands toward the gorilla, keeping her palm open in a universal gesture of peace. The animal observed the movement attentively, then looked directly into her eyes. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, human and animal stared at each other, with a mutual understanding that transcended the barriers of species. The gorilla carefully extended one of its enormous hands toward Ashley. When their palms touched briefly, she felt a connection she had never experienced before. The animal's skin was surprisingly soft, warm, and very human to the touch. In that simple contact, Ashley felt as if she were touching not just a wild animal, but a wounded soul that had found a unique way to express compassion. It was then that she noticed something that deeply moved her. On the palms of the gorilla's hands, there were small scars that seemed to have been caused by ropes or chains, marks that told the story of an animal that had been captured, kept in captivity, possibly mistreated. These discoveries explained so much about its behavior. It knew what it was like to be hurt, scared, and vulnerable. The sound of the helicopters was getting closer. Ashley knew she needed to make a decision. She could continue trying to signal her location, risking being found by the rescue team, or she could accept that perhaps this extraordinary experience should follow its natural course. Looking at the gorilla, which had returned to its guard position near the entrance of the cave, Ashley felt a deep gratitude she had never experienced before. That animal, which anyone would consider dangerous, had risked its own safety to protect her. It had shared its refuge, its food, and somehow its company with a stranger of another species. Ashley searched her memory for everything she knew about animal behavior. She remembered stories of gorillas in captivity that developed deep bonds with their caretakers, demonstrating capacity for grief, joy, and even a sense of justice. But she also recalled documented cases of animals that, after traumatic experiences, developed protective behaviors toward vulnerable individuals, even of other species. The most likely explanation for the gorilla's behavior was that it had been a victim of human mistreatment in the past, possibly kept in illegal captivity, and later had managed to escape or been released into the wild. Its experiences had taught it to recognize vulnerability and suffering, developing an empathetic response that led it to protect other injured beings. When the sound of the helicopters began to fade away, Ashley felt a complex mixture of disappointment and acceptance. Part of her wanted to be rescued, to return to the known safety of her previous life. But another part, deeper, knew that that experience was changing something fundamental in her way of seeing the world and her place in it. The gorilla seemed to perceive the change in her emotional state. It approached again, this time carrying some fruits that it had apparently collected near the cave. It offered them to Ashley with a gesture that was unequivocally generous. She accepted a small fruit that she recognized as similar to a guava, bit it first to show it was safe, and then offered half back to the gorilla. This simple act of sharing food created between them a ritual of mutual trust. Ashley began to see the gorilla not as her captor, but as an unexpected companion on a journey that was redefining her most basic understandings about nature, intelligence, and compassion. As the afternoon progressed, Ashley made a discovery that deeply touched her. Observing the gorilla organizing leaves and branches, she realized that it was creating a more comfortable area for her to rest. Each movement was deliberate and careful, demonstrating a consideration that went far beyond basic animal instinct. When she finally lay down on the improvised bed of leaves, Ashley looked at the gorilla that had resumed its vigilance near the entrance of the cave. The last lights of the day created dramatic silhouettes that transformed its powerful figure into something almost mystical. She knew that her life had been divided into before and after that moment. Nothing would be the same when she returned to the human world, if she returned at all. That night, for the first time since the beginning of the experience, Ashley slept deeply. Her dreams were filled with images of impossible connections, of understandings that transcended words, of a world where compassion could emerge from the most unexpected places. And in all these dreams, a protective presence kept guard, ensuring that no harm reached her. Ashley woke with the first rays of sun filtering through the entrance of the cave. For the first time in days, she felt truly rested. Her leg still hurt, but the pain had diminished considerably. More importantly, the panic that had accompanied her since the beginning of that experience had been replaced by something she could only describe as a deep and unexpected peace. The gorilla was exactly where she had last seen it the night before, near the entrance of the cave. But now it was sleeping. Seeing it at rest allowed Ashley to observe details she had missed when it was moving. Its breathing was slow and regular, and even sleeping there was an impressive dignity about it. One of its hands was resting on the ground near her, as if even unconscious it maintained its protective function. It was then that Ashley noticed something that deeply moved her. Near the gorilla's hand, there were small objects that she recognized as hers. The whistle she had used the day before, some coins that must have fallen from her pocket, even a hair tie. It had carefully collected and preserved these small things, as if they were precious treasures. This simple gesture revealed to Ashley a truth that touched her heart. That animal didn't just protect her by instinct, but had developed a genuine affection for her. In the most human terms possible, it cared about her well-being not just as a matter of survival, but as a real emotional connection. When the gorilla woke a few minutes later, Ashley was silently crying, not out of fear or frustration, but from a complex emotion that mixed gratitude, admiration, and a deep sadness at realizing how much she had underestimated the capacity of other species for complex feelings. The animal immediately noticed her altered emotional state. It approached cautiously, and for the first time gently touched her face with the back of one of its enormous hands. The gesture was so human, so full of compassion, that Ashley couldn't contain the sobs that escaped from her throat. "I'm sorry," she said aloud, knowing that it wouldn't understand the words, but hoping it would catch the sincerity in her tone. "I'm sorry for everything humans have done to you. I'm sorry for being afraid when all you wanted was to protect me." As if it had understood perfectly, the gorilla emitted a low and melodious sound that sounded almost like a song of consolation. It sat near her, not invading her personal space but offering its comforting presence. In that moment, Ashley understood that she was experiencing one of the purest and most genuine connections of her life. It was then that she heard human voices in the distance, organized shouts, sounds of people moving through the forest with purpose. The search team had resumed activities with the sunrise. Ashley felt her heart accelerate, but not with relief as she would have expected. Instead, she felt a complex mixture of anticipation and imminent loss. The gorilla had also heard the sounds. It immediately stood up and positioned itself near the entrance of the cave, clearly assessing the situation. Ashley could see the tension in its muscles, the way its eyes moved quickly between her and the direction from which the voices came. It was making a decision. Suddenly it turned to Ashley and looked at her with an intensity she would never forget. In that look she saw a clear communication. It was time for them to say goodbye. It had fulfilled its purpose of keeping her safe and now needed to return her to her own world before the situation became dangerous for both of them. The gorilla carefully lifted her once more. Ashley wrapped her arms around its neck, no longer out of fear but out of affection. She could feel the powerful muscles moving under its fur as it navigated through the forest toward the approaching voices. This time, she paid attention to every moment of the journey, knowing it would be the last. It took her through trails that seemed familiar, but that Ashley knew were different from the ones they had used 2 days before. The gorilla knew secret paths through the forest, routes that kept it invisible to human eyes when necessary. Its expertise in navigation was the result of years, possibly decades of life in that environment. When they reached a place near where the voices were clearest, the gorilla stopped in a small clearing. Ashley could see through the trees that the search team was just a few hundred yards away. Michael was there, as well as her friends and several other people she didn't recognize. The gorilla carefully deposited her in the center of the clearing, on a natural carpet of dry leaves. Then it stood in front of her for a moment that seemed suspended in time. Ashley extended her hands toward it, and it touched her palms with its own for the last time. In that final touch, she felt as if they were exchanging silent promises. She would never forget what she had learned, and it would continue to be the protective guardian it had become. Without further hesitation, the gorilla moved away. Ashley watched it disappear among the trees with the same silent grace with which it had appeared in her life. In a matter of seconds, it was as if it had never existed, except for the indelible memories engraved in her heart. Ashley began to shout, calling for the search team. Within minutes, Michael appeared in the clearing, followed by her friends and several other rescuers. The tears of relief from Jessica and Olivia were genuine and touching, but Ashley knew she would never be able to fully explain what she had experienced. During the medical care that followed, she told an edited version of the events. She said she had gotten lost after the fall, found shelter in the cave, and managed to survive on fruits she found in the forest. She mentioned having seen the gorilla from a distance, but didn't go into details about the extent of their interaction. Michael looked at her with curiosity, as if he suspected there was more to the story than she was telling. "You were very lucky," he said while examining her injured leg. "Very few people would be able to survive alone in the forest for 2 days, especially when injured." "I wasn't completely alone," Ashley replied softly, looking in the direction where the gorilla had disappeared. Back at the base camp, while her leg was being properly treated and preparations were being made for the return to civilization, Ashley made a discovery that confirmed everything she had suspected about her protector's past. Michael, still curious about her experience, brought some research articles about the local fauna. One of the articles mentioned a research project that had been conducted in the region decades ago, involving the study of primates in a controlled environment. The project had been abruptly abandoned when changes in environmental policies made it impossible to continue the research. Some of the animals had been relocated to zoos, but there were incomplete records about the fate of all specimens. "There are rumors," said Michael, "that some animals were simply abandoned in the forest when the project was shut down. If that's true, they could have adapted to the environment and lived here for years." This information provided Ashley with the context that was missing to fully understand her experience. The gorilla wasn't just a wild animal with atypical behaviors. It was probably a survivor of human experiments who had found a way to transform its trauma into compassion. In the days that followed her return to Chicago, Ashley discovered that it was impossible to resume her previous life as if nothing had happened. The experience in the forest had changed something fundamental in her perspective on relationships, empathy, and what really mattered in life. She began to get involved with animal protection organizations, particularly those that worked with primates rescued from abusive situations. Her colleagues and family noticed a profound change in her personality. She had become more patient, more observant, more capable of genuine connections with others. Ashley never returned to that specific region of the forest, but she frequently dreamed of her guardian. In her dreams, it continued its life in the forest, possibly protecting other lost travelers, transforming its own pain into unexpected acts of kindness. 6 months after the experience, Ashley received a call from Michael. He had heard reports from other tourists in the region who mentioned sightings of a large gorilla that seemed to observe groups of visitors from a distance, never approaching, but apparently ensuring they were safe. "There's a theory among the local guides," Michael told her, "that there's a guardian in the forest, someone who protects visitors from dangers they don't even know exist. No one can explain why certain groups never encounter problems, even when they venture into dangerous areas." Ashley smiled hearing these words. She knew exactly who this mysterious guardian was and felt a deep gratitude for knowing that it continued doing what it did best, transforming its own experience of suffering into protection for others. The experience in the forest taught Ashley that compassion can emerge from the most unexpected places, that intelligence and empathy are not exclusive prerogatives of human beings, and that sometimes our greatest lessons about humanity come from creatures we would never consider our teachers. Her life was never the same again, and she wouldn't have it any other way. She had discovered that true adventure wasn't in seeking superficial emotions, but in opening her heart to impossible connections and learning that love and protection can take forms we would never imagine. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Ashley and her unexpected guardian has touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours. This narrative about unlikely connections and compassion that transcends species reminds us that nature still holds mysteries capable of transforming our way of seeing the world. To continue this emotional journey with us, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the extraordinary bonds between beings from different worlds. You can find it by clicking here. If this story awakened in you the same emotion we felt in telling it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique narratives that celebrate the complexity of life and the beauty of unexpected connections. Don't miss our upcoming content and share in the comments how this story touched you. We eagerly await your reflections.